June 1943. Somewhere over the Pacific, a reconnaissance plane cuts through the upper clouds, a sliver of metal glinting in the morning sun. Below, the ocean stretches in 1,000 shades of blue, indifferent and infinite. Inside the aircraft, an officer scribbles notes on a clipboard, sweat beads on his neck despite the cold. The engines hum with relentless precision, a mechanical heart beating for an empire. War has become a contest of endurance, but few yet understand what that truly means. Japan's officers believe victory will come through spirit, satiation, discipline, sacrifice. Factories in Osaka, Nagoya, and Manchuria run as best they can, constrained by shortage and blockade. Yet in their intelligence briefings there are rumors, fragments of reports, about America's production scale so vast it sounds like myth, numbers beyond comprehension. Plants that never sleep. In Tokyo, bureaucrats read the captured data with skepticism. 24-hour operation? They shake their heads. No factory can sustain that tempo without collapse. Human fatigue, material exhaustion. These are immutable truths. The industrial heart must rest, must cool. Machines break. People need sleep. So they think. But across the ocean, the lights of Detroit, Seattle, and Los Angeles burn through the night. Overhead smokestacks pour orange flame into a black sky. The sound of stamping presses, the clatter of conveyor belts, the hiss of steam. It all fuses into one unending symphony. Steel, aluminum, oil, rubber. The raw vocabulary of modern power. At Willow Run in Michigan, the world's largest bomber factory, 42,000 workers file in and out under floodlights. Day blends into night. Each hour, a B-24 Liberator rolls off the line, wings, engines, guns, and all. In California, shipyards along the coast echo with the hammering of rivets. Women in overalls lift wrenches beside men. Cafeterias hum at 3 a.m. Trains unload cargo while others depart laden with war machines. America has become a single organism, breathing in rhythm with the clock. In 1942, Japan produced just over 8,000 aircraft. The United States produced 47,800. A year later, that number doubles. How could such excess be real? The Japanese Army General Staff debates the figures late into the night. Some dismiss them as propaganda, others as statistical tricks. One officer remarks privately, "Even if true, machines cannot win wars. Only the spirit of men can." His words echo an older world, the belief that courage outweighs material. But courage cannot manufacture fuel or aluminum. It cannot replace the 1,000 small hands that make a bomber's skeleton come alive. The contradiction grows sharper with each passing month. Reports from New Guinea and the Solomons reveal a pattern. American forces always have more, not by a margin, but by orders of magnitude. Fresh tanks, spare parts, endless fuel. While Japan's soldiers fight with dwindling ammunition, their opponents seem to conjure supply from thin air. Every battle feels like pushing against a tide that never recedes. The realization does not come suddenly. It dawns, like morning fog lifting from a valley, slow, reluctant, unstoppable. The first Japanese officers to visit captured Allied supply depots in the Pacific describe what they see with disbelief. Boxes of food labeled by brand. Medical kits, uniforms packed in duplicate, even toothbrushes, one for every man. Everything cataloged, numbered, designed for function. There is no improvisation here, no shortage concealed by discipline. This is industry made flesh. In Washington, D.C., the War Production Board coordinates every nut and bolt, every gallon of fuel. One nation, unified by logistics. The concept itself is revolutionary. Civilization as an engine. What the Japanese Intelligence Corps cannot yet grasp is that America's factories are not simply producing, they are learning. Every hour, data flows back. Defects counted, assembly times measured, designs adjusted. The factory is alive, self-improving. For the first time in history, production itself becomes a science. The officers who will one day walk through these plants, prisoners, observers, or post-war visitors, will experience something closer to revelation than inspection. The sound alone, that unbroken thunder of labor, will shake their beliefs. They will see women at machine presses, teenagers driving forklifts, black and white workers side by side. The hierarchy of the old world dissolves into efficiency. The power of civilization is no longer measured by conquest, but by coordination. Yet in 1943, the realization has only begun to form. The Pacific War still burns, and faith still blinds the eyes of empire. The officers, the workers, the generals, all march beneath banners of destiny. None yet understand that the real weapon of modernity is not the bomb or the gun, but the system that builds them. Beneath the drone of aircraft engines, beneath the glow of factory lights half a world away, the axis of civilization quietly tilts. They don't know it yet, but they are walking into the future. September 1945. Northern California, the war is over. The ocean that once separated enemies now carries them as passengers. A small transport ship enters San Francisco Bay beneath a gray dawn. Its deck carries men in faded khaki, Japanese officers, recently repatriated or held for observation. Their faces are still sharp with discipline, but their eyes search the horizon with an unfamiliar mixture of awe and disbelief. They were told America was a land of chaos, excess, and soft living, a civilization drowning in its own comfort. Yet as they pass beneath the long red span of the Golden Gate Bridge, what they see is order. The bridge's steel ribs rise from the mist like a monument to something larger than victory, a triumph of coordination, of calculation. Beneath it, ferries move with mechanical grace. Trains glide along the shoreline, synchronized to invisible schedules. The officers stand silently. Salt wind touches their faces. Somewhere a siren wails, and not an alarm, but routine. Morning shift change. Factories waking. They had come reluctantly to learn. American authorities had decided that some Japanese officers, engineers, and industrial administrators would tour the defeated enemy's production facilities as part of post-war study and reconstruction. The mission was both diplomatic and educational, to observe, to understand what had been missed. Before departure, in Tokyo, their instructors reminded them of the official line: America's strength lay only in its resources, its vast lands, its oil, its rivers. "They are fortunate, not exceptional," said one senior engineer before boarding. Without resources, their machines would stop as ours did. But even as the words were spoken, doubt lingered. The statistics told another story. By 1944, the United States had produced 96,000 aircraft, 28,000 tanks, and over 60,000 landing craft. Not only had they built them, they had standardized them. The same bolts, the same tools, the same maintenance manuals from Alaska to Australia. It was a level of precision that no nation, not even Germany, had matched. Now, as the officers disembark, they step onto concrete that vibrates faintly with motion. Trucks rumbling, cranes lifting, trains clattering. The air smells of oil, iron, and roasted coffee. Everything feels alive. At first, they assume the Americans are preparing for inspection, perhaps a demonstration to impress former enemies. But as they travel inland to the aircraft plants of California and the auto works of Michigan, they realize nothing is staged. The rhythm never stops. Night or day, the machines continue. At Willow Run, the massive B-24 factory stands like a city under glass and steel. Even after victory, it hums, now producing civilian goods, tractors, refrigerators, automobiles. The visitors walk along catwalks suspended over endless assembly lines. The noise is overwhelming. Metallic percussion echoing through the vast hall. Light floods from hundreds of skylights falling on faces young and old, men and women all moving with purpose. An interpreter shouts facts over the din. 4 million square feet of floor space. 1 mile from end to end. 1 plane every hour during peak wartime production. The officers exchange glances. No one speaks. They simply watch the belts, the cranes, the bodies in motion. An orchestra of labor. Back home, even at the height of war, Japanese factories had been smaller, scattered, vulnerable. Workers labored with pride but lacked machines, fuel, standardization. Each workshop improvised. Each craftsman adjusted by hand. Precision came from skill, not process. It was human, not systemic. Here, the inverse is true. The process itself is the craftsman. The worker obeys its rhythm, trusts its certainty. Efficiency replaces ritual. Quantity becomes a moral act, the duty of democracy. In one corner, they see a line of women in blue coveralls. They laugh as they work, wiping grease from their hands, adjusting their tools. Beside them, a black worker lifts a crate while a white supervisor marks the manifest. No visible tension, only routine. The officers are silent. For men raised in a culture of rigid hierarchy, of purity and obedience, the scene feels almost subversive. Here, function erases distinction. One colonel, formerly of the Army Aviation Bureau, writes later in his notebook, "I thought we fought men of steel. Instead, we fought a civilization of organization." The tour continues. In Detroit, they witness the Ford River Rouge complex. Furnaces glowing, molten iron poured like sunlight into molds. The guide explains how ore, arriving by ship, becomes an automobile within 72 hours. The officers touch the warm railings, smell the sulfur, feel the floor tremble under conveyor belts. It is not chaos. It is choreography. By evening, as they return to their lodgings, their clothes smell of smoke and lubricant. Their notebooks are full of sketches, conveyor paths, tool diagrams, production ratios. Yet none of it fully explains what they feel. A sense that this, more than armies or admirals, was the source of defeat. The propaganda they had once believed, of lazy workers, of a nation spoiled by luxury, collapses silently inside them. What they see is not indulgence but discipline of another kind. A collective intelligence spread across machines, roads, rails, and schedules. A civilization of function. In the night, from their windows, they watch the horizon glow with factory lights that never dim. Somewhere a whistle blows, signaling another shift. The sound is steady, confident, almost serene. They do not sleep easily. Something fundamental has changed, not in the world around them, but in what they understand about it. Disbelief turns to curiosity. Curiosity begins the long road to understanding. October 1945. Michigan. The morning mist clings to the roofs of the Willow Run plant as freight trains arrive from the east. Their brakes screech, echoing off the hangar walls. Steam mixes with the smell of oil and cold metal. Inside, America's industrial heart is already awake. The visiting Japanese officers walk through the side entrance in protective goggles and earplugs. The noise is alive, hammering, stamping, grinding. It rolls over them like surf. The guide shouts above it, "Each worker handles 37 parts per hour. Each part has a number. No guesswork. Every few minutes a horn sounds. A crate moves. A belt shifts. The rhythm never falters. Inside the plant, the human eye struggles to absorb the scale. Endless rows of machines stretch beyond sight. Lathes, presses, cranes, welding arms. The floor is marked with yellow lines. Every motion has its lane, every object its place. Even waste has a path. Metal shavings swept into bins, melted down, reused. Nothing stops moving. Nothing is idle. The officers are told that this very plant once produced one bomber every 63 minutes. Now it builds cars, washing machines, and engines for peacetime. The same rhythm, the same system, only the output has changed. War converted to peace without pause. They study the process like archaeologists examining a living ruin. One colonel, trained as a mechanical engineer, crouches beside a conveyor and notes the spacing of components. The measurements are exact. Standardized bolts, identical welds, interchangeable parts. This, he realizes, is not manufacturing. It is replication, precision elevated to philosophy. Across the aisle, a woman operator monitors a control panel. Her movements are unhurried yet exact, the ease of mastery. Above her, a clock counts each cycle. Below, a sign reads, "Quality is everyone's job." That phrase unsettles them. In Japan, quality belonged to the craftsman, to the master of technique. Here, it belongs to all. It is not a secret, but a standard. They move on, deeper into the maze of production. Overhead walkways tremble with the passing of carts. Loudspeakers announce schedule updates. Workers shift positions without confusion. One flow ends, another begins. From the observation deck, the plant looks like a living diagram. Order through movement. Every worker, the guide explains, is connected to the next. If one stops, the whole line feels it. So they do not stop. The officers exchange glances. It is the inverse of their wartime experience, where command moved downward, slow and rigid. Here, coordination moves sideways, peer to peer, shift to shift. The system governs itself. In a smaller workshop, they are shown the feedback room. Charts cover the walls, defect rates, repair logs, cycle times. Colored pencils mark daily fluctuations. Engineers in shirt sleeves gather around tables, adjusting formulas. It is not punishment, but process, learning from data. Improvement measured, visualized, understood. The visitors stare at one chart labeled downtime, 2.3%. One whispers, "We never even measured ours." Outside in the loading yard, cranes lift finished products onto flat cars. Forklifts weave between them, guided by whistles and hand signals. A rhythmic ballet of logistics. Each crate bears stenciled numbers, destinations, serial codes. A system within a system. Distribution feeding production, production feeding consumption. Civilization made circular. In the distance, smokestacks exhale white vapor into a blue sky. It no longer smells of war, only of movement. The officers pause to take it in. They realize they are not merely observing machines. They are witnessing a social order made visible. A democracy of function, each part equal, each task vital. They remember their own wartime factories, dimly lit, fragmented, dependent on personal devotion. Workers starving, improvising repairs, praying for raw materials that never came. Even the best engineers fought entropy daily. Here, entropy has been engineered out. At lunchtime, the visitors eat in the factory cafeteria. Trays slide on rails. Coffee flows from steel urns. Everyone eats the same meal, soup, bread, fruit. No ranks, no uniforms, only efficiency. The officers watch the workers laugh, share cigarettes, read newspapers. Some discuss baseball scores. Others talk about overtime pay. The atmosphere is neither military nor ceremonial. It is casual, confident, and quietly proud. A young foreman, noticing their curiosity, gestures around him. "We build," he says simply. That's all. The simplicity disarms them. For years, Japan's ideology had equated simplicity with purity, self-denial, and sacrifice. But this is a different simplicity, born of method, not myth. A clarity that comes from design. By afternoon, they visit a power station supplying the factory. Massive turbines hum in a sealed hall, feeding electricity through underground cables. Gauges flicker, meters tick, valves hiss in steady rhythm. Energy itself has become industrialized, measured, regulated, optimized. The officers write down figures, voltage, capacity, output ratios. But the deeper lesson is invisible, interconnection. Each part depends on another, yet the system never hesitates. One engineer murmurs, "This is not chaos." Another replies quietly, "It is designed abundance." The phrase stays with them long after they leave the plant. Outside, the sun begins to set over the flat fields of Michigan. Freight trains depart one after another, headlights slicing through twilight. The rhythmic clatter of wheels fades into the distance, the sound of a civilization in perpetual motion. For the first time, the visitors understand. Power is no longer a matter of conquest or territory. It is the mastery of systems, the ability to turn process into strength. They came seeking explanations. They leave with conviction. This was not noise. This was order, written in steel and time. November 1945. Washington, D.C. The visitors sit in a conference room inside the War Production Board building. A place that feels more like a brain than an office. Walls lined with charts, tables of ratios, graphs of steel, copper, rubber, and aircraft production. The air smells faintly of paper, coffee, and calculation. A young American economist presents without ceremony. "Gentlemen," he begins, pointing to a projection screen, "this is how we fought the war." On the wall, a chart blooms, a line rising month by month, unstoppable. Aircraft output, 1940, 6,000 units. 1941, 19,000. 1942, 47,800. 1943, 85,000. 1944, 96 out of 300. One officer blinks. Another writes the numbers twice as if to confirm they are real. The economist continues, his tone factual, almost detached. By 1944, the United States was producing one airplane every 5 minutes. That includes fighters, bombers, and trainers. Production did not slow until the war's end. Another chart follows. Tonnage of merchant shipping. Between 1941 and 1945, he says, Our shipyards launched over 5,700 Liberty and Victory ships. Each one carried roughly 10,000 tons. That's more tonnage than the entire Japanese merchant fleet at the war's start. Built, sunk, and rebuilt again. The officers listen in silence. They had read such figures before, but never seen them displayed this way. Visualized, quantified, made visible as a living truth. The graphs themselves feel alive, like arteries of a civilization pulsing with energy. Numbers become stories. Numbers become power. Another slide. Steel production. 38 million tons. Japan's peak, 8 million. The Economist points to the ratio. More than 10 to 1. But it is not just quantity. It is rhythm. Each ton is linked to another. Each resource mapped. Each delivery timed. The war had not been won by heroism alone, but by the precision of logistics, the mathematics of motion. He gestures to a chart titled Average Work Hours Per Week by Sector. The line peaks at 54.8 hours in 1943, then steadies. Efficient, sustainable. Even under full mobilization, he notes, the system did not collapse. We added shifts, not exhaustion. Machines worked 24 hours a day. People did not. That line lingers in the visitors' minds. Machines worked 24 hours a day. People did not. In Japan, exhaustion had been the engine. Factories running on the faith of workers who refused to rest. Here, rest itself was engineered into productivity. Efficiency replaced sacrifice. The machine carried the burden, not the man. A new report circulates. The War Production Miracle, compiled by the Office of War Information. Tables fill the pages. 6,000 aircraft, 1,000 tanks, 2.6 million machine guns, 41 billion rounds of ammunition, 500 naval vessels, 5 billion yards of cloth. One of the officers writes in his notebook, "The numbers are not exaggerations. They are truth made visible." The Economist continues, "Every factory kept daily records. Every shipyard tracked minutes per rivet. We built not just machines, we built measurement itself." He pauses, then adds, "That's the real secret." The Japanese engineers exchange glances. They understand the words, but not the magnitude. Back home, production had always been an act of will, to endure, to sacrifice, to finish despite the odds. Here, it is an act of mathematics. Efficiency is morality. Later, they are shown the supply networks that fed the Pacific War. Convoys, pipelines, repair depots. On a map, thin red lines cross oceans, carrying fuel from Texas to Australia, food from Iowa to Saipan, spare parts from Chicago to Guam. Each line represents a rhythm of delivery, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, everywhere motion, everywhere calculation. They realize that the American industrial system is not a collection of factories. It is an ecosystem, balanced, self-correcting, expansive. The true weapon of democracy is integration. They visit the Bureau of Labor Statistics, where clerks type endless columns of data, wages, hours, materials, output. No secret formulas, just discipline. A culture of counting, refining, comparing. Data as conscience. In one corner, a framed poster reads, "What gets measured improves." The phrase hits like revelation. At night, back in their quarters, the visitors pore over the reports again. They try to imagine replicating this system in Japan. A nation of islands, scarce in raw material, rich in spirit, but poor in process. Could such a network exist there? Could a culture built on hierarchy adapt to one built on flow? One writes in his journal, "We once believed power came from unity of faith, but here unity comes from design." They conquered distance, error, and fatigue. They built a system that learns. Another adds, "Numbers are the architecture of civilization." They understand now why the factories never slept. It was not simply greed or arrogance. It was belief. Belief in the continuity of progress, in the idea that improvement never ends. The lights of industry were not symbols of excess. They were symbols of discipline. The next morning, they will visit homes, schools, and shops to see how this mathematical order extends into ordinary life. But tonight, as they stand at the window overlooking the Potomac, they feel the quiet hum of generators beneath the city. Power that does not rest. Civilization in electric form. They realize that the war had been a contest not between nations, but between centuries, between the age of faith and the age of systems. And in that contest, the future had already chosen its side. December 1945, Illinois. Snow drifts along the tracks outside the Pullman railworks. The visitors arrive wrapped in borrowed coats, escorted by American officials who speak softly, but carry the air of routine. The war's bitterness lingers, but the hostility has cooled into study. The mission continues: learn, observe, understand. Inside the plant, the heat strikes first, dry and metallic, radiating from the furnaces. Sparks fall like orange snow. Workers move with practiced rhythm, faces streaked with sweat and soot. The officers had expected indifference or arrogance from victors. Instead, they are greeted with nods, handshakes, even smiles. No speeches. No humiliation. Just work. A foreman, sleeves rolled high, offers them coffee in tin mugs. It tastes bitter, burnt, but generous. The simple act unsettles them more than any machine they have seen. They had been raised to expect contempt from conquerors. What they encounter instead is curiosity, a quiet civility that confuses the calculus of war. In one corner of the factory, a Christmas tree stands. Small, improvised from scrap wire and colored bulbs. Beside it, a table of donated food, sandwiches, pie, apples. Workers gather laughing. Someone turns on a radio. Bing Crosby sings, "I'll Be Home for Christmas." The officers listen, unsure whether to look or turn away. The sound feels impossibly normal. Joy rebuilt from ashes. Later, they are taken to a housing project built for wartime workers. Rows of modest homes stretch into the snow, smoke rising from chimneys. Each one looks identical, yet alive. Laundry lines, bicycles, children's sleds. The guide explains that during the war, families from every state lived side by side here. Different races, different faiths, he says. But the same shifts, the same purpose. The officers recall their own workers' quarters. Cramped, dark, rationed, disciplined by fear. Here life feels looser but not weak. The order is voluntary, not imposed. In one living room they meet a family. A woman who worked in the steel mill, her husband returned from Europe, and 2 children born during the war. She offers them tea, apologizing that it's the cheap kind. The house smells of wood smoke and detergent. A small calendar hangs on the wall. December 1945. Beside it, a framed photograph of a bomber with names scribbled across the fuselage. Our pride, Willow Run crew. The Japanese officers ask polite questions through the interpreter. The woman answers without hesitation. Yes, I worked nights. Everyone did. We didn't think about winning. We just wanted to finish what we started. She smiles, not boastful, simply tired. There is dignity in her ordinariness. A strength without performance. That night, one of the officers writes in his notebook, "We expected arrogance and found decency. Even in victory, they are generous. They believe work itself is moral." In the following weeks, their visits expand beyond factories, to schools, libraries, and town halls. In classrooms, they see children learning arithmetic and civics together, girls and boys raising their hands with equal confidence. Chalk dust floats in the sunlight. The lessons are practical: budgeting, geography, cooperation, civilization as education. In the libraries, they see citizens reading newspapers printed with both triumph and reflection. Articles discuss the rebuilding of Europe, the trial of war criminals, the need for peace. There is no gloating. The tone is sober, self-critical. Even the victors question their power. One headline reads, "Industry must now serve humanity." The officers stare at it for a long time. They had been taught that democracy was indulgent, disciplined, that only obedience could sustain a nation. But here they witness something paradoxical: freedom with order, individuality within structure. Workers joke with their bosses, students question their teachers, journalists criticize their government. Yet the system holds. In a Chicago train station, they observe a scene that will stay with them forever. A black porter helps an elderly white woman lift her suitcase. She thanks him. He nods, smiles, moves on. The moment is brief, but for the Japanese visitors, raised in a society bound by rank and purity, it feels profound. Hierarchy softened by courtesy, respect without fear. They begin to understand. Civilization is not merely machines or mathematics. It is how people behave when no one is watching. At a small diner that night, they sit beside factory workers finishing their shifts. The air smells of fried onions and coffee. A waitress hums softly while refilling cups. The officers eat quietly. Eggs, toast, bacon. The food is simple but abundant. They remember wartime rations. Rice mixed with barley, salt measured by the pinch. Here, salt comes without thought. Plenty is invisible because it is normal. One officer murmurs to another, "We fought against this abundance." The other replies, "We never understood what it meant." They leave a few coins on the counter. The waitress smiles. "Merry Christmas," she says. The words feel foreign yet strangely comforting. Outside, snow falls under the glow of streetlights. The city hums, cars passing, trains whistling, power lines buzzing faintly overhead. Civilization is not sleeping. It is breathing. That night, before turning out the light, the eldest of the officers writes one last line in his diary. They realized civilization was not built on hatred, but on how people treated strangers. The next morning, they will travel east again to see how education and democracy sustain what factories began. But tonight, surrounded by the hum of distant industry and the warmth of ordinary kindness, they begin to feel what no report can quantify. Humanity as infrastructure. January 1946. Massachusetts. Snowmelt runs along the cobblestones of Cambridge. The air smells faintly of coal smoke and thawing earth. On this cold morning, the visiting Japanese officers and engineers are led through the iron gates of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, a name they had seen only in reports. Now made of stone and sunlight, they walk past students carrying books, laughing in the chill, the war already a distant echo to their youth. The officers feel both old and out of place. The interpreter explains that many of these students served as mechanics, pilots, or radio operators during the war, now returned, studying engineering, physics, and management under the GI Bill. A democracy that educates its soldiers after victory. That idea alone stuns them. Inside a lecture hall, they take seats along the back wall. The room smells of chalk and ink. Professor, sleeves rolled up, draws a diagram on the blackboard. A turbine, broken into vectors and formulas. His voice is calm, deliberate. "Gentlemen," he tells the class, "machines are extensions of the human mind. The stronger the mind, the better the machine." The Japanese visitors write this down. Here they see something absent from their own wartime academies: open questioning. Students interrupt, challenge, propose improvements. The professor welcomes it, even smiles. There is no punishment for uncertainty, no shame in ignorance. Knowledge grows by collision. Freedom becomes a method of learning. After class, they walk through laboratories filled with oscilloscopes, model engines, and scale aircraft parts. Young men and women work side by side, testing airflow in glass tunnels. One student explains to a visitor that his project will be published for anyone to read. No secrecy, no hierarchy, no guarded prestige. Knowledge as common property. One officer whispers, "They share power by sharing information." Later that week, the delegation visits Harvard's library. They step into a hall lined with oak shelves, the air heavy with dust and quiet. Thousands of books, technical manuals, histories, philosophical works. The scale is overwhelming. One shelf alone holds more literature on economics than the entire Tokyo Ministry of Commerce possessed before the war. The idea that civilians could freely study such material without clearance or status feels revolutionary. That afternoon, they are shown something smaller but equally transformative: a local public school. Desks of painted wood, children reciting lessons, sunlight flashing on their pencils. The teacher writes 3 words on the board: rights, duties, cooperation. Simple, but complete. The officers realize that these children are being trained not merely to obey, but to participate. Democracy, they see, is not chaos. It is discipline taught early, the discipline of thinking. At lunch, they are invited to dine with university staff. Sandwiches, soup, and conversation. The Americans speak openly about politics, debate the merits of policy, even criticize their own government, without fear. One engineer from Boston tells them, "Criticism keeps us honest. The system depends on it." The visitors nod politely, but the phrase resonates long after the meal ends. In the evenings, they stay in modest university lodgings. The rooms are heated, the sheets clean, the silence deep. On the bedside table lies a copy of Time magazine. The cover shows a photograph of a smiling worker beside a newly converted peacetime factory. The headline reads, "The Next America, Building for Peace." One officer studies it carefully. The tone is neither triumphal nor bitter, just forward-looking. A nation already planning its next transformation, powered by the same machinery that had won the war. He thinks of home, Tokyo still in ruins, food rationed, electricity scarce. Yet he senses that this too is a lesson. Power is not hoarded. It is renewed. Days later, the delegation visits a radio station in New York. Behind glass, technicians adjust dials and cables while an announcer speaks into a microphone. "Good morning, America," the voice says. "Today, we talk about progress. It is not a sermon, not propaganda, just information made public. News, music, science, weather, all transmitted freely to anyone who can listen." The officers are reminded of their own wartime broadcasts. Rigid, monotone, censored. Here, communication is not controlled. It circulates. They begin to understand that democracy is not an ideology, but an infrastructure of schools, libraries, newspapers, and trust. During their final lecture at the Department of Commerce, an American economist tells them, "The factory and the classroom are two halves of the same machine. One builds the body, the other builds the mind." They write this down without speaking. In the train back to Washington, the scenery passes. Frozen rivers, bare trees, mills along the tracks. Smoke curls upward from small towns, each one lit by the hum of a generator, the promise of electricity. Civilization as continuity, the rhythm of production joined with the rhythm of learning. One officer opens his journal. Observation became study. Study became understanding. Understanding, perhaps, will become rebirth. At that moment, he looks out the window and sees a group of children skating on a frozen pond. Their laughter drifts through the cold air. It feels timeless yet modern, the freedom of play, unafraid of authority. He realizes that this too is part of the lesson. Civilization reproduces itself not through command, but through curiosity. When they return to their lodgings that night, one of the younger officers writes a final reflection. "We were not prisoners of walls, but students of a civilization." Outside, the city glows under winter fog. Somewhere in the distance, a factory whistle sounds the end of another shift. The rhythm continues, steady, unbroken, like the pulse of learning itself. The visitors know that soon they will return home, to ruins, to reconstruction, to questions that have no easy answers. But they will carry something invisible across the ocean, the idea that freedom, properly trained, can outproduce fear. Observation has become education, and education, they sense, will become destiny. April 1946. Yokohama Harbor. The gray sea shimmers under a weak morning sun. The ship that carried the observers across the Pacific now drifts toward the battered Japanese coast. The air smells of rust, coal smoke, and distant decay. From the deck, the officers see what remains of the port. Twisted cranes, sunken hulks, collapsed warehouses. A silence hangs over the water, broken only by gulls. Home, but changed beyond recognition. They disembark slowly, carrying notebooks filled with diagrams, figures, and questions. Their uniforms are plain now, stripped of insignia. The empire they served no longer exists. The emperor's voice, that trembling broadcast months earlier, still echoes in their memory. Endure the unendurable. They had endured, but now they must rebuild. As they walk inland, the scale of destruction expands. Entire districts of Tokyo reduced to ash, streets flattened into gray plains. Children play among rubble, their laughter thin in the wind. Women line up for rice rations. Smoke rises from makeshift kilns where steel once burned bright. The officers stop often, not from exhaustion but disbelief. They had left a defeated nation. They return to something closer to absence. And yet, amid ruin, life stirs. Markets reappear. Small stalls selling sweet potatoes, sandals, scrap wire. Men push carts of salvaged brick. A radio crackles from a shop window. American voices, occupation announcements, weather reports. New words enter the air. Democracy, reform, equality. They sound foreign but urgent. When the officers gather in a small classroom-turned-office, they spread their notebooks on the table. Data, diagrams, charts, pages filled with sketches of assembly lines, power grids, schools, and management structures. What began as intelligence now looks like scripture, the blueprint of a new civilization. One engineer, older than the rest, stands at the window looking out over the blackened ruins. "We cannot rebuild what was," he says quietly. "We must build what we have seen." His words hang in the dust-filled air. Over the following months, these men disperse to ministries, universities, and reconstruction bureaus. Each carries fragments of understanding from their journey. One joins the new Ministry of International Trade and Industry, MITI, advocating for systemized production and standardized components. Another begins teaching industrial management at the University of Tokyo, introducing concepts of feedback and continuous improvement. The youngest, a former Army engineer, visits textile mills in Osaka and draws chalk lines on factory floors. Primitive echoes of the American flow system. It is not imitation, but translation. They are not rebuilding America. They are decoding the future. Outside, the nation trembles between hunger and hope. Inflation spirals. Food shortages spread. But in small workshops, men and women begin to make again: pots, bicycles, tools. The hum of machinery returns, faint but persistent. Electricity flickers through damaged grids. Somewhere in the dark, an engine starts, coughing, then steady. The sound feels like resurrection. At night, the returning officers write by candlelight. They record not only what they saw, but what they understood. That civilization's strength lies not in command, but in coordination. Not in uniformity, but in shared purpose. One writes, "We once believed discipline meant silence. Now I see it means harmony." Another, "The machine is not our enemy. Ignorance is." They see that America's victory was not accidental. It was structural, a product of education, trust, and the freedom to innovate without permission. They realize that the true weapon of democracy is process, the invisible framework connecting factory to classroom, citizen to state. As the occupation deepens, reforms spread. Women vote. Land reforms dismantle feudal estates. Censorship dissolves. Schools teach civic responsibility. Newspapers print words once forbidden: rights, equality, progress. The officers watch, skeptical at first, then curious. Some resist, others adapt. But all sense that history has turned a corner. In 1947, when the new Constitution is announced, one of the former visitors stands among the crowd outside the imperial palace. The emperor's voice again fills the air, this time not surrendering, but promising renewal. Around him, thousands listen, silent, reverent, hopeful. The officer closes his eyes and recalls the hum of American factories, the sound of systems that never stopped. He wonders if his country too can learn to keep the lights on, not for conquest, but for continuity. In the years that follow, reconstruction accelerates. Steel mills reopen. Power plants hum. Shipyards rebuild with modern designs. The lessons the officers brought back, standardization, process feedback, continuous improvement, begin to take root. Within a decade, Japanese industry will become the envy of the world. But in 1946, it is only a fragile seed, growing in the ruins of pride. For now, they walk through streets still half buried in dust. They see workers bow to one another before beginning their shift, a ritual blending old culture and new discipline. They see children carrying school books printed on recycled paper, learning words like science and freedom. They see trains running again, slow but steady. One evening, an officer stands on a bridge over the Sumida River. The water glimmers faintly with reflected light from a nearby power station, one of the few running continuously. The sound of its turbines hums in the distance, steady as breath. He thinks of Detroit, of Willow Run, of the rhythm that once overwhelmed him. Now, in this fragile city, he hears an echo, smaller but alive. He writes one final note: "We have been defeated by civilization itself, but in defeat, we have begun to learn civilization's language." The war had ended with silence, the silence of surrender. Reconstruction begins with sound, the quiet rhythm of renewal. They came home changed, stronger. humbler and aware that the path to power runs not through conquest, but through comprehension. They will spend their remaining years translating that lesson into policy, into engineering, into education. Their children will inherit a nation built not from command, but from understanding. In the ashes of empire, the lights begin to flicker on, and for the first time in memory, they stay on through the night. Tokyo, 1956 night. A light rain drifts through the industrial district of Kawasaki, turning the streets to mirrors. A low hum fills the air. Turbines, generators, assembly lines. The sound is steady, confident, familiar. For the first time in a generation, Japan's factories are not echoing with war, but with production for peace. Inside one plant, fluorescent lamps burn white against polished concrete. Workers in clean uniforms move with practiced rhythm. Conveyor belts glide, presses stamp, gauges flicker green. On the wall hangs a motto written in both Japanese and English: better work, better life. An older supervisor walks the floor, clipboard in hand. His face is lined but calm. Once, long ago, he had walked through the roaring halls of Willow Run in Detroit. He had watched American workers build bombers faster than Japan could count them. Now, he watches his own people build automobiles, radios, cameras, tools of daily life. He recognizes the rhythm, but it no longer feels foreign. It is his own. Outside, smoke rises not as a symbol of destruction but of recovery. Freight trains roll out toward Yokohama, loaded with exports labeled Made in Japan. The city lights reflect on wet rails, stretching toward the horizon like arteries of light. Somewhere a factory whistle blows, 3 short bursts, the end of a shift. The war that once shattered the world has turned into memory. What remains is the lesson. When the surviving officers, now engineers, professors, policymakers, gather for the 20th anniversary of their American study mission, they speak without ceremony. No speeches of glory, no bitterness, only reflection. One recalls the first moment he saw the lights of San Francisco from the bay. Another remembers the hum of the machines, the smell of oil and bread, the laughter of women in factory aprons. Each detail, once strange, has become part of their moral vocabulary. They speak quietly, almost reverently, of systems, of how the Americans measured, improved, and learned. But more than that, they speak of how they treated one another, how equality they realized was not chaos but coherence, how education freely given produced order more lasting than fear. They had gone abroad expecting to study machines. They returned having studied people. The transformation was not instantaneous. It took a decade of reconstruction, reform, and persistence. But by the mid-1950s, Japan had rebuilt its industry on new foundations: statistical control, continuous improvement, cooperation between labor and management. The factory became a school. The school became a laboratory. The nation became an organism that learned. Productivity rose. Wages rose. Pride returned. Quiet, pragmatic, not imperial. Factories ran late into the night, but this time the lights symbolized prosperity, not desperation. Children walked home from school beneath telephone lines that carried voices, not orders. Radios played jazz. Newspapers spoke of export, innovation, peace. The hum of engines was no longer the sound of domination. It was the sound of civilization remembering itself. Scholars would later call it the Japanese economic miracle. But to those who lived it, it felt simpler, a slow awakening, a national heartbeat rediscovered through observation and humility. In government archives, the original reports from 1945 still exist. Yellowed pages filled with handwritten notes. Standardization, flow, human respect, education. Beside one entry, in faint pencil, a margin note reads, "The true victory of freedom was not destruction, but demonstration." That line becomes the unofficial motto of the delegation, and, in a sense, of post-war Japan itself. In the years that follow, Japanese engineers will visit American firms again, not as defeated observers, but as partners. They will exchange methods, diagrams, and ideas. American teachers will visit Japanese universities to lecture on management science. Japanese experts will teach quality control to the world. The exchange becomes cyclical. The defeated teaching the victors how to perfect what they began. Civilization correcting itself. By the 1960s, Tokyo's skyline glows brighter than ever. Neon signs, rail lines, television antennas piercing the night. The same light that once symbolized defeat now marks revival. The hum of generators merges with the murmur of conversation, the laughter of children, the whistle of trains. The modern world, rebuilt from rubble, pulses with energy once thought lost. One evening, the aging officer, now an old man, stands on his balcony overlooking the city. Below, traffic moves like liquid fire. The air smells of rain and steel. He closes his eyes and remembers the roar of Detroit, the laughter in the American cafeteria, the hands that offered him coffee without disdain. He realizes that everything he witnessed, every number, every sound, every gesture, had not been a lesson in power, but in character. He whispers to no one in particular, "Civilization is not what we build. It is how we build together." The light from a nearby billboard reflects on his face, bright, white, unwavering. Somewhere, far across the ocean, the same light burns over another city, another factory, another generation. The rhythm continues, not of war but of work, not of fear but of purpose. The story that began with disbelief has become belief. The empire that sought domination has become a democracy seeking perfection. The officers who once studied their conquerors have become teachers of industry, apostles of process. History has turned full circle. The same light, the same hum, but with meaning transformed. The engines run through the night, as they did once before, not to destroy but to sustain. The rhythm of civilization continues, alive, self-correcting, human. And though the men who first heard it are fading into history, their understanding remains. The machine was never the enemy. The system was never soulless. The numbers were not cold. They were expressions of cooperation, the mathematics of trust. The rain softens. The city glows. Somewhere a factory whistle signals the dawn of another shift. They left with the taste of democracy. Sweet, real, unforgettable.